I used to love the way our apartment sounded at 6:30 p.m. Keys on the counter, the kettle's shy click, the soft thud of your bag against the chair leg you always missed by an inch. The little mistakes were the music of our ordinary, and I carried them in my chest like a secret melody. Lately, though, dinner had started tasting like an apology neither of us knew how to serve. You ate in small bites and spoke in smaller words. I pretended my fork scraping the plate wasn't loud enough to bury the quiet growing between us. It began with rain. Real rain pressed flat against the window, making the street lamps smear into gauzy halos. I remember thinking that kind of rain feels like a curtain closing. You were late. I told myself it was traffic, that the city had swallowed you the way it swallows all of us, slowly, politely, without teeth. At 8:17, I set your plate in the oven on low, like I was keeping a place warm for the version of you I knew. At 9:02, I turned the oven off. At 9:30, I opened the window just enough to taste the cold. You came in at 10:11 p.m. I know because I watched the digital clock roll forward as your key found the lock, as your shoulders rounded, as your eyes did not find mine. You smelled like someone else's detergent, not perfume, not sweat, the clean, anonymous smell of sheets you weren't supposed to touch. Work ran late, you said, voice soft, body already turned away. You didn't kick off your shoes. You didn't say you were sorry. You didn't ask if I'd eaten. The questions hung there like shirts on wire hangers, trembling slightly whenever the building shifted. Okay, I said. That word has 100 sizes. Mine did not fit. That night I watched you sleep with your phone turned face down on the nightstand. I thought about the first time you fell asleep on my shoulder, how your breath had found the steady rhythm of mine, how the world could be taught to hum along with us. Now your breaths were shallow, careful, as if even your lungs were keeping quiet. The next afternoon, you left your laptop open on the table, a carelessness that felt like a dare. The apartment was a gray bowl of light. The kettle hissed. A neighbor upstairs dragged a chair. It all sounded far away. I didn't go to the laptop at first. I walked past it. I washed a cup that didn't need washing. I dried the same spot on the counter 3 times. The water on my hands cooled. The email subject line was ordinary. Tomorrow. The sender's name was ordinary too. A man. I'd heard it once. Twice. In passing, the way you pass a bench you'll never sit on. There was nothing lurid in the words, nothing cinematic. Just dates, small jokes, and the intimacy of not having to explain yourself. And then a folder, cleaned out, recently, emptied trash, empty again, like a room that smells of new paint because the walls are hiding something. I closed the laptop. The world tilted a few degrees. The color of the living room rug, the one we argued over for weeks, suddenly looked too proud of being chosen. I sat on the floor, my back against the couch, and stared at the place your knees had permanently softened the cushions. Light moved over the wall in a slow diagonal. The hum of distant traffic held its breath. My phone buzzed. A group chat. Memes, the kind of laughter that feels like eating alone. When you came home, you brought tulips. Yellow. You arranged them in the chipped white vase we never replaced because we loved its flaw, a hairline crack like a vein under skin. You kissed my cheek without landing. You told me a story about your day, the kind of story with no corners to catch on, smooth, polished, kind to the touch. I nodded. I asked if you wanted tea. You said you were too tired, and your eyes slid toward the bedroom door like it was a shore you'd been swimming toward all day. After you showered, you came back smelling like citrus and sleep. You sat beside me on the couch, careful, like I was a glass of water you didn't want to spill. The tulips leaned toward the window. We watched a show we used to quote in the kitchen while cooking. Now the lines landed and died. The credits rolled. You yawned and apologized to no one for being exhausted. Do you love me? I asked, finally, softly, like testing a step in the dark. Your eyelids lifted. What kind of question is that? The kind that keeps the house standing, I said. I kept my voice steady. My hands were not. You stared at the paused faces on the TV, frozen mid-laugh. Of course I do, you said, but you said it like a person reading a safety instruction card on a flight already in the air. Is there someone else? I heard the rain again, though the forecast had promised a clear night. My heart is a bad meteorologist. You blinked, tilted your head. Your mouth opened, then closed. No, you said, and for the first time I understood that no can be made of thin, breakable glass. I nodded, stood, walked to the kitchen. Turned the tap on, filled the kettle. The ordinary motions hurt with their innocence. When I looked back, you were smiling, a small, tired thing. Can we not do this tonight? You asked. Please. It was the please that cut. Polite, professional. As if I were a coworker requesting an extension. Sure, I said. The kettle clicked. The city's hum rose and fell like a breath I couldn't catch. I thought about the empty folder, the empty trash, the empty space where an explanation should sit. Later, when you were asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the steady blink of the router reflect in the window. Green, dark, green, dark. It looked like a heartbeat practicing leaving. I picked up your phone. It was locked. My thumb hovered over the screen. I set it down. I went to the living room. I opened the laptop again. There was a cleaning software icon I'd never seen you use. It had done a good job. The edges of absence were neat. I stood in the doorway and listened to the rain. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was just my ribs. Things shift, even when you want them to stay. In the morning, you said you had an early meeting. You kissed the air near my jaw and promised to pick up dinner from the Thai place we loved. I made coffee and held the mug between my palms like a prayer no one taught me. The tulips had opened overnight, mouths surprised to find themselves awake. When the door clicked shut behind you, the apartment didn't echo. Some silences have weight. I sat down at the table. I wrote your name on a scrap of paper. I wrote mine beside it. I drew a line between them. It looked like a bridge. It felt like chalk. The first message came at 9:12 a.m. from an unknown number. We should talk. My stomach recognized the voice behind the words before my eyes did. I typed, erased, typed again. Then I asked for a place, a time, neutral ground. At noon, the rain began again without ceremony. I left the tulips by the window. I left your laptop closed. I left the apartment as if I might come back to a different season. The elevator was slow and smelled faintly of someone's cologne. In the mirrored wall, a man looked back at me with a face I'd seen in old photographs, someone who had not learned yet that love can be tidy and still dishonest. On the street, the city wore its wet well. People moved with their chins tucked into their collars, carrying their afternoons like fragile boxes. I walked toward the cafe and told myself I was just going for coffee. The kind you drink when the doctor has bad news and asks you to sit. I pushed the door open and the bell chimed. He stood when he saw me. He was ordinary in the way a doorway is ordinary. You pass through it, and yet it changes where you are. He looked nervous. He looked kind. He looked like a person who would be good at small, careful things. "Thanks for coming," he said. I held onto my breath like a coin I didn't want to spend. "Before you say anything," I said, "tell me if you're the reason my house sounds like an apology." He blinked. The barista called out a name that wasn't mine. The rain leaned against the window like a listening friend. He swallowed. "I think we both deserve the truth." I sat. The chair was cold. My hands found each other in my lap and did not fit. Outside, a bus sighed at a red light, and in that sound I heard the part of the story that would not let me sleep again, not the same way, not for a while. And then he said her name, gently, like he was placing a glass on a table without leaving rings, and the afternoon tipped over the edge of itself, quietly, completely, in a way only love manages to do when it decides to fall. He told me he met her in the ugliest way, by accident that learned to call itself fate, a project overlap, emails that became jokes, jokes that became a kind of hand extended in a room where everyone pretends to be fine. He spoke with the patience of someone assembling a delicate model, apologizing every time a piece clicked into place. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "There's a way grief wears politeness like a borrowed coat." It fit him. "It did not keep me warm. What do you mean to do now?" I asked. The coffee smelled of anything but comfort. It smelled like mornings I would miss. He looked down at his hands. No ring. A small scar near the thumb, pale as a thread. "I told her to tell you," he said. "I didn't want this to be hidden, not like this." "You told her to tell me," I repeated, filing the sentence where I keep things that sound like kindness and feel like evasion. "She didn't." He flinched at that, a quiet, inward movement. "I'm sorry." I wondered if he knew how often that word collapses under the weight given to it, how apology is not a bridge but a raft with too many feet on it. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. The rain pressed a gray hand against the window. The light on his face had the color of old photographs. "Because you deserve it," he said. "Because I couldn't keep being the reason someone else's life is untidy." Untidy. I let the word sit on the table between us, next to the napkin holder and the salt shaker with a clog near the top. Untidy like the drawer where we keep batteries that may or may not have life left in them. Untidy like the sleep you get in a bed that isn't yours but pretends well. "How long?" I asked. 3 months, he said. 4 if we count the part where we were still pretending we weren't counting. I noticed I wasn't angry the way movies promised I would be. There was no plate to throw, no shout to release. Just an ache bending itself into the shapes of daily things, the way the spoon tapped the cup, the way my knee bounced, the way the room stayed the room while I changed inside it. He told me details in a careful voice, enough to make it real, not enough to feed the part of me that wanted to catalog every stolen glance like evidence in a trial I didn't ask to attend. I learned about the cheap hotel near the freeway with the mediocre art. I learned they once sat in a park and watched a child let go of a red balloon too early. I learned she cried after and said it was nothing, just the wind. "Do you love her?" I asked. His eyes caught the light and held it. "I don't know yet," he said. I know I wanted to save her from something. Maybe that's not love. Maybe it's just the kind of vanity people write poems about without ever naming it. I believed him. That felt worse. When I left the cafe, the rain let up as if the sky had run out of a thing I could name. The city resumed its practiced rhythm, cars stitching the streets together with patient thread. I walked home counting the cracks in the sidewalk, as if they were steps in a dance I'd missed learning. The elevator had the same faint cologne. I wondered how many ghosts a building can hold. Inside, the apartment wore its afternoon like a shrug. The tulips had begun to bow, generous to gravity. I placed my hand on the table where you sat to do your makeup on weekend mornings. I thought of the way you leaned toward the mirror with the frankness of a person who trusts her own face. I thought of the way I learned your quiets. This was a new quiet. It did not invite me in. I didn't crash. I made a list. It's ridiculous what the body chooses when the heart is on fire. I wrote laundry because the basket had been filling with the kind of indifference that makes you late on Thursdays. I wrote call landlord about the window leak. I wrote buy more coffee. The list steadied my hand. On the fourth line I wrote your name. On the fifth I wrote mine. On the sixth I wrote truth, and then I put the pen down and let the word be as heavy as it is. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight drew a pale, rectangular halo. I listened to the building shift, to the heat click and settle, to a distant siren unspool itself into thinner and thinner sound. I counted the seconds between each blink of the router's green light. I counted the ways I'd loved you, morning coffee placed by your hand while you were still in the shower, the song I never skipped because you once said it made you feel 19 again, the chair I moved closer to the window because you said you liked to read with your feet in the sun. At 3:14 a.m., I got up and made toast. The ridiculousness of the act almost saved me. I buttered it too fast and tore the surface. I ate standing in the kitchen, the crust scraping my teeth into awareness. In the sink, a spoon surveyed the room like a periscope. The tulips in the dark looked like women leaning in to tell a secret. Morning came, and with it an agreement I made with myself. I would not break before noon. I would not call you before the city finished its first round of coffee and sighs. I would not become a person who begged for a reason to turn a lamp back on. You texted at 10:07 a.m., dinner at 7. Ty, the audacity of ordinary. I stared at the words until they became the kind of shapes children learn to trace before they understand them. Sure, I wrote back, and then muted the conversation as if muting could teach silence how to be kind. In the hours between decision and arrival, I cleaned. Not the panicked cleaning of someone expecting a guest, but the meditative attention of a person honoring a room they may need to leave. I dusted the bookshelf and found the ticket stub from our first movie. I wiped down the counter and found the place where your elbow had stained the wood a shade deeper with years of leaning. I vacuumed the rug and watched the lines appear like furrows in a field waiting for rain. At 6:55 p.m., the buzzer rang. Your footsteps in the hall had always been easy to distinguish, confident, slightly quickened, like you were late to something delightful. Tonight they were measured. You carried 2 paper bags that breathed steam into the room. You set them down and looked at me with the kind of caution people reserve for dogs they don't know. We need to talk, I said. You exhaled. Okay. We didn't eat, the food cooled. The apartment wore the smell of basil and regret. You sat on the edge of the chair like a student waiting for a test to begin. I know, I said. You didn't ask what. You didn't play dumb. You looked down at your hands, and in that small admission, a gaze turned away, I learned something honest about you. How long? I asked. The question was the same in every language the heart understands. You told me the truth, not all of it. Enough to make the room real again. 3 months, maybe 4. It started as a relief, then a mistake, then a habit with a good alibi. You told me about loneliness with both of us in it. You told me about crying in a bathroom stall at work and deciding that if you should drown it may as well be in warm water. I tried to end it, you said, voice stitched to the floor. I kept trying. By erasing it, I asked. Your chin lifted a fraction. I couldn't stand the sight of it, the proof. It felt like I'd written a confession on every surface. You swallowed. I didn't want to be that person around you. I didn't want to watch you see me that way. There are 1,000 versions of the moment a house falls. Ours was quiet. No slammed doors. No shattered plates. Just 2 people arranging words into neat stacks and placing them on shelves too high to reach without hurting something. What do you want? I asked. A longer pause this time. You looked around the room as if the furniture might tell you where to put your hands. I want to go back, you said. I want to be the person you think I am when you're making coffee and humming. Your voice broke in the middle and then corrected itself. I don't know if I can. I nodded, the tulips laned further. The router blinked. The street below gathered its evening rush and pushed it past our window like an old, tired movie. I met him, I said. Your eyes lifted like a curtain. When? Today. You turned your face away and covered your mouth with your fingers. Whether it was to hold something in or keep something from leaving, I couldn't tell. I didn't ask him to, you said, as if it mattered which parts of the ship's leak was yours. He said we deserved the truth, I told you. He said he didn't want to be the reason someone else's life was untidy. You winced at the word. I hated that word when he said it. I do too, I said. We didn't touch. The distance between the edge of your chair and the edge of mine was the kind sunlight can't cross at dusk. The Thai food gave up its steam and went quiet. What now? You asked. Your voice was small and clean and lost. I don't know yet, I said, but I know I won't live in a house where the windows are polite enough to pretend there's no rain. When you left that night for your sisters, you said, for a place with fresh air, I stood at the window and watched the streetlights come on one by one, obedient, unquestioning. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and imagined the city could take heat from me and give it to someone who needed it. In our bedroom, your side of the bed looked like a stage with the actor gone off to find the rest of their lines. I didn't sleep. Again, the body and the heart are slow learners. Around 4, I sat on the floor and leaned my back against the couch. The tulips had drooped in that elegant, resigned way flowers have, as if bowing to a song they finally recognized. I thought, this is the shape of grief, not a tower, a bend. At 6:12 a.m., I decided to start living in a house with the lights on, even if it showed the dust. I made coffee. I opened the window to the morning's cold. The city's hum tuned itself to a lower key. I gathered the things you'd left behind, a scarf, a small tin of lip balm, your favorite pen, a paperback with its spine softened by love, and set them on the table in a line. It felt ceremonial. It felt like making a door. It felt like defeat and it felt like dignity, and I didn't know which one to feed. The intercom buzzed at 8:01 a.m. It was you. Your voice was thin, threaded with a careful urgency. Can I come up? You asked. I looked at the tulips, at the steam rising from my mug, at the line of your things like an apology trying to make itself into a person. Come up, I said, and as your footsteps returned to the hall, the building seemed to remember how to breathe, and the morning light lifted its shoulder higher along our wall, deciding this time to stay and witness what would be said and what would be left unsaid, both heavy, both true. You stood in the doorway like the truth asking permission to enter. Your eyes found the line of your things on the table and paused there, softening. You closed the door behind you, careful, like someone returning a book they kept for too long. The apartment wore mourning. The light was pale, honest. The radio down the hall in Mrs. Domings's place was playing a bolero at whisper volume, like the building had decided today needed music that remembered how to ache politely. Hi, you said. The word fell flat and then tried to stand. Hi, I answered, and the emptiness of our greetings felt right. We were strangers trying to speak a dialect we both used to dream in. You moved toward your things, then stopped. You arranged them, you said, almost a question. I didn't know if you were coming to collect or confess, I said. I decided to make space either way. You nodded. The tulips bowed toward you like a chorus. I couldn't sleep, you said. I kept rehearsing. None of it sounded like something a person should say to someone they love. The kettle clicked. I'd forgotten it on the way to remembering everything else. Tea? I asked. Yes, you said, and the gratitude in your voice was a small, fragile animal. While the water poured, you stood by the window and looked down at the street. People were doing the thing people do, going places, pretending the morning owes them anything. You wrapped your arms around yourself the way you do when you're cold or ashamed. I could never tell the difference. Maybe there isn't one. I'm not here to argue, you said. I'm not even here to explain. I'm here to tell the truth like it's the last clean shirt in the house. I handed you a mug. You took it with both hands, inhaled the steam, and didn't drink. Okay, I said. You exhaled. I was lonely, you began, and I felt my jaw clench at the predictability of it, at the tired honesty of a cliché, but not just the kind where you miss hugs. The kind where you start to feel like the version of you that exists in your house is a photo that's been on the fridge too long, faded, smiling because it was told to. You set the mug down and pressed your palms to the table, as if holding it in place. I met him when I just had one of those weeks. Every meeting felt like a room with the air a half-inch thinner. Every night felt like a test of whether I could be charming while tired. He was kind. He looked at me like I was not a problem he needed to solve. I mistook that for love. I made it into love. Your voice wobbled. You steadied it like a plate that almost fell. I erased things because I thought if I could make the evidence disappear, I could keep the part of me that comes home to you unchanged. I thought I could stay your person if the proof of everything else was quiet. You can't edit a wound while it's still bleeding, I said. You just smear it. I know that now, you said, and there was no defense in it, only the kind of exhausted agreement that comes after the arguments have eaten everything they needed to. We sat, across from each other. A table between us like a field you can walk if you're brave or foolish. The tea cooled while the apartment listened. "Do you love him?" I asked. The question fell from my mouth like a ring dropped in deep water. "I loved how he made me feel less blurry," you said. "I don't know if I love him. I don't know if I loved you the way you needed while I was loving the idea of being saved from myself." "Do you want to be here?" I asked. The morning light climbed the wall a slow inch. You looked at the door, at your scarf, at me. "I want to be the woman who never did this," you said. "I want to be the woman who sits at this table and tells you about the ridiculous thing that happened on the train. I want to say I'm sorry and have it change the shape of the room, but I think the room has learned a new shape and it doesn't listen to apologies." I swallowed. The hurt organized itself into a calm, steady thing that could stand upright without holding onto furniture. "I'm not interested in punishment," I said. "I'm interested in not living with a stranger. I'm interested in a house where the evening doesn't smell like we're avoiding something." You nodded, and if I told you I'm willing to do the work. Not as a performance, as the way back. I looked at your hands. I knew those hands. The small scar near your thumb from cutting a bagel wrong on a Sunday that felt like it would be ours forever. The faint ink stain that appears near your ring finger on Thursdays because of the cheap pens at the front desk. I knew those hands the way a person knows the light switch in the dark. I also knew the places those hands had been when they were not here. "I don't know yet," I said. "Honesty can be a kind of relief even when it gives you nothing to hold. I know I can't unknow. I know that even if the house stops smelling like we're avoiding something, I might flinch when the kettle clicks." You breathed in, out. "Will you ask me anything else?" you said. "So there are fewer surprises later." "Did you ever plan to tell me?" I asked. You flinched. "No," you whispered. "I planned to live with the ghost and hope you didn't notice the extra footsteps." There it was, the thing I couldn't forgive. Not the accident of falling, but the decision to let a haunting set a place at our table. "I destroyed the evidence," you said, voice small, "because I thought if I kept it clean, nothing would stain us. I didn't realize the scrubbing would thin the fabric." We sat inside that, quiet. The city sent up a siren and then felt embarrassed by the volume and softened it into distance. The radiator clanked as if to remind us of winters survived. "What do you need from me now?" you asked, and the question carried no manipulation, only the bare humility of someone finally standing in their own mess without asking for a mop. "I need you to leave for a while," I said. The words surprised me by how gentle they were. "I need mornings without your cup on the counter. I need to see if the house can learn a new sound without your footsteps teaching it. I need to remember my own voice when it's not answering yours." You nodded. You picked up the scarf, the lip balm, the pen. You left the paperback. The way you looked at it told me you did it on purpose. "A loan to a future that might never collect. I'll go to my sister's," you said. I'll tell him it's over. It should have been already. It will be." You looked up, not as a performance, as a way of being a person again. I believed you. I also knew belief is a bridge you can't live on. You moved toward the door and then paused. "May I hug you?" you asked. The politeness of it made me want to weep. "Not yet," I said, and watched your throat move as you swallowed the hurt. You nodded, opened the door. The hall smelled faintly of someone's toast and the neighbor's fabric softener and the kind of life that carries on even when yours folds in the middle. You stepped out and then turned back. "If you need anything," you said, and then bit the last word in half because you knew how it sounded. "I know," I answered, and for once the sentence wasn't a truce. It was a period. You left. The door closed with the soft certainty of something that understands its job. I stood for a moment and looked at the place you had not stood enough lately, the space in front of the kitchen window where the morning warmth paints a small square of light on the floor. I stepped into it and felt for a second like a person who could survive winter. I picked up the paperback and slid it under the couch, not to hide it, to keep it from the sun. Paper burns quietly. At noon, I walked to the park and sat on a bench near the pond where the city pretends at softness. A red balloon bobbed at the edge of a puddle, tethered to nothing, refusing to fly or sink. I watched it and thought, if I let go now, what am I letting go of, the balloon or the fist I've made around it? My phone stayed quiet. The quiet felt like a decent person. It minded its business. I tried to learn from it. Near evening, clouds gathered in a theatrical mood but didn't deliver. The air thickened without relief. I went home and opened all the windows. The apartment breathed like an animal recovering from a run. I made dinner for 1 and 8 with the TV off. A chair sat empty. It did not move to comfort me. It did its job, being empty. As the light drifted into the corners, I put your things into a small box and placed it by the door. Not as a punishment, as a statement of what the room now knew. I turned the lamps on low and let the apartment be the kind old friends are present, unimpressed by your worst day, quietly proud of your decision to stand up and wash your face. Then the intercom buzzed again. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect anyone. I pressed the button and asked, without thinking, "Who is it?" "It's me," you said, but it wasn't your voice. It was his. The air in the room rearranged itself into something with sharp corners. I pressed the button that releases the door without knowing why. The hall filled with footsteps that were not familiar yet had learned the beat of my building too quickly. He stood at my door with rain in his hair that the sky hadn't earned. He looked like a decision that regretted being born. "I'm sorry," he said, breathing hard. "She told me she was coming here. I tried to stop her. I thought maybe she'd make it worse. I thought maybe I could help. I don't know what I'm doing." "You shouldn't be here," I said, and it came out like a prayer that knows it won't be answered. "I know," he said. He stepped back as if distance could become dignity if you respected it enough. "She's downstairs. She's crying. She said she can't do this, that she wants to fix it now all at once." I told her that's not how anything works. I closed my eyes, the house shifted, the router blinked, the tulips somehow were still bowing. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, helplessness so unadorned it almost made me kind. The elevator groaned to a stop, a door slid, footsteps, these I knew, your footsteps, coming toward the place where every choice would earn its own weather. And as I stood with my hand on the knob, the hall full of two people who meant different kinds of damage and believed they were practicing love, the morning's promise of honesty returned to collect the dead of evening, and the room held its breath like it had always known what we would make it witness. I didn't invite him in, I didn't shut the door. I stood there in the doorway and let the hallway decide what kind of stage it wanted to be. The carpet, thin with years of footsteps, the bulb overhead, a little too bright for forgiveness. The air stale from closed windows and other people's dinners. You turned the corner, your face, eyes wet, mouth set to a small, determined line that looked like someone threading a needle in a moving car. You saw him first, then me. Then the space between us like a country map nobody taught you to read. "What are you doing here?" you asked him, and your voice was not unkind, just tired of carrying the wrong bag. "I thought you'd come here," he said. "I didn't want you to, I wanted to say goodbye." He swallowed, "Away from this door." You looked past him to me. "May I come in?" you asked, and the manners of our old life knocked, blinking in the too bright light. I stepped aside. You entered. He stayed in the hall, hands open at his sides in the universal pose of someone who wants to help and knows he can't. The apartment held you differently now. You looked smaller inside it, like a person who had bought a coat for a winter that came too hard. You stood at the edge of the rug and turned your palms up in a gesture I knew from years of you explaining impossible schedules. "I told him it's over," you said, quick like a bandage pulled. "For real, for good. I told him I chose to be the version of me that can look at myself in the morning. I told him I won't ask you to forgive me today. I won't ask you to let me stay. I'm here to say goodbye to the house we made and to say thank you for the mornings, even the stupid ones." The words landed like rain that finally gets to be rain, not metaphor, weather. He shifted in the hall, and for a second I hated him for breathing. Then I let the hate go. It did not deserve the rent I'd been charging it. "I don't want to break anything else," you said. I wanted to hand the pieces back with both hands. "You can leave the pieces on the table," I said. "They know the way of this room better than we do right now." You laughed, an involuntary, absurd little sound that made me remember the first time you laughed in my car at a red light because a song mispronounced a city's name. I felt the ache roll through me, then flatten, then leave behind a calm that scared me with how humane it was. He spoke from the doorway, voice small. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time without any expectation of what the word might wash clean. "I know," I said, and meant it like a weather report, not a pardon. You moved to the table and placed the scarf there gently, the lip balm, the pen. You traced the paperback's spine with a fingertip and left it where it was. "Some things belong where they are," you said, and I wondered if you meant the book or me or the hurt. "I'm not going to ask for another chance," you said. "I don't trust the part of me that would want to skip chapters. If there's a way back, it isn't through the door I kept erasing. It's through time, and that's not something you can rush without wrecking it." I nodded, my throat tightened and then eased. "I don't know if there is a way back," I said. "But I know I want a morning where the first thing I feel isn't fear. I know I want to drink my coffee and hear the city and think of nothing for a minute. I want to be allowed that small mercy." "You deserve it," you said, and there was no self in the sentence, only a strange, clean generosity I didn't know what to do with. He stepped back into the elevator, giving us the hallway like a blessing. "Goodbye," he said to you. "I hope you find the right weather." You gave him a small nod that wasn't cruel and wasn't kind, just true. The elevator side closed, took him away. Some part of the building loosened, the way a jaw unclenches in sleep. We stood there, two people who had loved each other well enough to make grocery lists and playlists in rain feel like a good excuse to be home. Two people who had broken the thing they were drinking from and were now too tired to keep trying to catch water with their hands. "Can I do one last thing?" you asked. "Not to change your mind. To let mine change shape without breaking again." "What is it?" I asked. You crossed to the window and opened it wide. Cold came in, fresh and rude. The curtains breathed. The city sent up its familiar notes. A bus yawned, a bicycle bell, a child practicing the same joke on anyone who would listen. You stood in that air and closed your eyes. When you opened them, they were the eyes of someone returning a borrowed time. "Thank you," you said. "For the dinners we ate in stupid silence. For the notes you left on the kettle when you woke up earlier. For the way you touched the back of my neck at crosswalks like a compass point." I swallowed the grief like a vitamin. "Thank you for the mornings," I said. "For the way you learned to love my worst jokes. For pretending not to notice when I cried at commercials." We smoothed the goodbye like a bedsheet. No wrinkles, no lingering. You picked up the box by the door and lifted it like it weighed more than it did. It did, we both knew. "Will you be okay?" you asked, and immediately winced at the stupidity of the question. "I will be something," I said, then something else. Then something like okay. You smiled, not the smile you give cameras, the one for me. That's the right order. You left then, no dramatic curtain, just a door closing the way doors do. I stood still until the silence laid down and fell asleep at my feet. I made coffee. I washed the mug I used yesterday and chose a different one because sometimes change needs props. I sat at the table and listened to the morning in full, without translation. It rained, a soft, apologetic rain that didn't insist on being noticed. The tulips had finally given in to their bow. I trimmed their stems, gave them fresh water, and set them back by the window. They looked surprised by their second chance at standing. I took the paperback from beneath the couch and opened it to the middle. A sentence about winter landed on my lap like an uninvited truth, that letting go is not a single gesture, but a season. You don't release and walk away. You open your hand and discover every finger learned a different lesson. Around noon, the rain stopped and the light became honest. Not bright, not inspiring, just real, like the face you see in the mirror when you've slept enough to remember your name. I wrote another list. At the top I wrote groceries. Underneath, call landlord. Underneath, water the plant you always forget. On the fourth line, I wrote your name, then drew a line through it, not erasing, marking the place where you were. I opened the window wider, the room filled with a breeze that smelled like wet pavement and bakery. The sound of distant traffic folded itself into a hum I could live with. I took a deep breath and felt it land all the way at the bottom of me. Forgiveness, I realized, might be a place you visit before you're ready to move in. I wasn't packing for that trip yet, but I could see the road. It ran along a river. It was lined with empty chairs and morning light. It was quiet, and in that quiet, finally, there was no question I needed to ask and no answer I needed to fear. I turned off my phone and let the apartment be what it was, a room with a window, a table, a chair, a man learning how to drink coffee without making it into a ceremony for survival. The city breathed, so did I somewhere. A new season cleared its throat, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't sound like absence. It sounded like space. It sounded like space.